Sumo is famed for being the world's oldest continuing professional sport, but the sport actually changes a lot more than you'd think despite its 2,000-year history, even just in its modern era. So, because we appear to be on the precipice of another big change for sumo, I thought it'd be fun to chart sumo and Japan's journey through their modern era. So, without further ado, in 1958, Tokyo Tower officially opened. Skilled workers from across the country traveled to Tokyo to contribute to its construction and help it grow upward out of the bombed flat landscape of 1945. 1958 was also a monumental year for sumo as the JSA made the move from 4 basho per year, so 1 per season, to 6, 1 every other month. This meant longevity and injury prevention became crucial to rikishi hoping to make their mark on the sport. Not everyone would succeed in this endeavor, but undoubtedly it provided an opportunity for truly staggering feats to be achieved, namely in the form of Taiho, the first of our modern sumo legends. Taiho would ultimately win 32 top division championships in his career spanning 1957 to 1971, a record that looked insurmountable and set the bar for what it takes to be a legend in modern sumo. But just like with Tokyo Tower, Taiho is interesting as a symbol bridging the gap between the devastation of World War II and Japan's public re-entry into the world community during the 1964 Tokyo Olympic Games and beyond. You see, Taiho was born Ivan Borishko in Karafuto Prefecture, modern-day Sakhalin Island, to mother Kiyo of Japan and father Marikyan Borishko, who had fled from Ukraine to the Empire of Japan in order to escape the Bolshevik Revolution. Ultimately, he and his family had to flee again when the Soviet Union invaded and took Karafuto Prefecture, Sakhalin, from the Empire of Japan at the end of the war. They ended up in Hokkaido, where Ivan became engrossed in the island's rich sumo culture, and the rest is history. But I think it's kind of beautiful to see a child whose upbringing was so clearly marred by the upheaval of the mid-20th century and rise up into the defining feature of the sumo landscape at the same time a television broadcast tower rose up to become Tokyo's defining feature. Ultimately, this era of economic success for Japan would outlast Taiho's career, carrying on through the 70s and the rivalry of Wajima and Kitanoumi, and would reach its zenith under a different sumo legend as both Japan and sumo learned to flex their muscles once again. By the 1980s, Japan's economic miracle was in full swing as the Japanese economy rose from the ashes of the war into the world's third largest economy by GDP. In fact, Japan's success was so great, it led to a sort of fear-inspired mania in the United States where leaders began decrying Japanese investment in American land and corporations as an attempt by Japan to take over the country. In sumo, the Taiho era gave way to the rivalry of Wajima and Kitanoumi like we mentioned, but as great as Kitanomi's 24 and Wajima's 14 championships were, it was a different rikishi debuting in the 70s who would ultimately make a run at Taiho's throne. Akimoto Mitsugu debuted in 1970, taking a shikona inspired from the 2 Yokozuna of his heya, Chiyonoyama and Kitanofuji, to become Chiyonofuji. While he fought against both obscurity and as much as his opponents throughout the 70s, the dawn of the 80s would be his doorway to greatness. Between 1981 and 1990, he would win 31 championships, ultimately falling just 1 short of Taiho. And this image of an undersized rikishi battling through a decade of obscurity before bursting onto the scene like a chiseled Adonis and overcoming larger, more traditionally powerful foes is easily the most succinct allegory for Japan in the 80s. Unfortunately for sumo, Chiyonofuji's 20-year career would come to an end with the dawn of the 90s, and so too would Japan's economic ascendancy. For a variety of reasons, Japan's economic bubble officially burst in the early 1990s, leading to years of economic stagnation as foreign competitors clawed back gains made by Japanese companies in the world market. By no means did Japan become poorer throughout this, but the days of never-ending growth were at an end, and a reintroduction to global competition was now at hand. In sumo, too, international competition burst onto the scene in the 1990s as the era of the Polynesians, primarily but not exclusively Hawaiians, had begun. Starting with Konishiki's rise to Ozeki and epitomized by the Yokozuna promotions of Musashi Maru, 12 championships, and Akebono, 11 championships, the 1990s marked the first time sumo was exposed to international competition, not only entering and competing in their national sport, but also rising to the top of it. Undoubtedly, this led to some trepidation among sumo brass and fans alike, but by the same token, it drove excitement in the sport. Like, these guys were good, and that mattered domestically and abroad. And to be sure, there were still traditional Japanese champions making their mark in the sport at this exact same time, like the brothers Wakanohana and Takanohana delivered more than their fair share of championships. But the message was clear to sumo. Like Japan, It was marching into a new global world in the 1990s and beyond. So, as Japan's economic butsukari continued into the new millennium, the country, like much of the world, entered into this new era of globalization. For Japan, this meant exporting pop culture in what became nicknamed Hello Kitty diplomacy. Whether it was Nintendo game consoles, Pokemon trading cards, or racing home after school to watch Dragon Ball Z, the importance of Japanese pop culture was definitely easy to see. As Japan continued to grow this cool image across the globe, a new opportunity for economic growth appeared: tourism. Taking off under Abe's prime ministership, his second one, but Japan began the process of ramping up tourism to help remedy the country's economic difficulties that had been kind of dragging on since the bubble burst. And as Japan globalized, so too did sumo. The new millennium saw the rise of Eastern European rikishi, South American rikishi, even a well-publicized Egyptian rikishi, but far and away the defining group of this new millennium were the Mongolians. Beginning with Asashoryu in 2003, 5 of sumo's next 6 Yokozuna were Mongolian. And they weren't just Yokozunas, like these guys dominated the sport. Asashoryu won 25 championships in just 7.5 years before being forced to retire after match-fixing allegations, suspensions, and assault allegations. Chiyonofuji won an impressive 9 Yusho before also being forced to retire after allegedly assaulting another wrestler to the point that his skull fractured. Hakuho became the greatest sumo wrestler of all time with 45 championships between 2006 and 2021, but his purportedly brazen and outspoken nature never won him any friends in the JSA. And those negative feelings may ultimately have cost him in 2024 when he was stripped of his stable and his wrestlers were transferred to Isegahama after it was revealed that one of his wrestlers was assaulting stablemates within his stable, despite the fact that worse cases of violence were actually committed by Japanese stablmasters or their charges. And those guys received much lesser punishments, leading some to justifiably call foul and accuse the JSA of anti-Mongolian racial bias. In the end, this darker side of sumo's new millennium mirrored Japan's own experience with globalization and a rise in tourism. The stories of tourists defacing culturally and religiously significant sites come frustratingly frequently, leading cities and towns to put bans on foreign tourists or alter their landscape to discourage tourists from coming. In the end, this doesn't feel that different to me from other countries around the world grappling with the aftershocks of globalization. I have no idea how these two linked concepts will resolve themselves. I don't know if sumo will open up to ideas from abroad on how to improve the sport while still maintaining the positive traditions that make it what it is. I don't know if Japan will take drastic measures to change the flow of tourists or find a way to reward tourists who respectfully travel to the country. But it's hard to look back at Japan and sumo's modern history and not think that they'll find a way to square these circles. Our Mongolian Yokozuna Chiyonofuji appears to be on the way out, but there are 3 incredibly young, incredibly exciting Ozeki challenging for the belt. Whether one, all, or none of them eventually puts on the Tsuna doesn't really matter to me. I'm just interested in how the next wrestler at the top ends up defining his era, and how his era will define him, whatever that ends up meaning. So, I hope you'll join me for the ride. Thanks for watching, everybody.